Ladies and gentlemen, stop what you're doing because what I'm about to show you tonight, what just exploded out of Washington, D.C. isn't a headline or a talking point or a controversy that fades away. No, this is a turning point. Two National Guardsmen, American service members standing watch in our nation's capital were shot point blank in an ambush that was so cold-blooded that investigators immediately flagged terrorism indicators. And before doctors even got them into surgery, the mainstream media rushed to protect their narrative. Don't blame the shooter. Blame the uniforms. Really? Yeah. They were running interference before the facts even landed. Why? Because the truth is a political earthquake. I mean, the suspect wasn't just an Afghan national. He wasn't just another failed case of Biden's thorough vetting, air quotes, right? I mean, he was flown into this country by Joe Biden himself during Operation Allies Welcome in 2021. And tonight, DHS sources confirm what the White House hoped you would never hear. He had CIA-linked ties back in Afghanistan. He was waved into America under Biden's promise of airtight screening, and now two guardsmen are fighting for their lives because of it. And then, within minutes, President Donald J. Trump stepped forward and did what leaders do. He announced a full pause on migration from the very countries Biden flooded into America, effective immediately. No committees, no excuses. This wasn't just a shooting. It was the moment that everything changed. Hit the like button and subscribe, guys. So what happened in Washington, D.C. wasn't random. It wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't community tension like MSNBC tried to shamelessly suggest. This was clearly an ambush, a deliberate, targeted, point-blank execution attempt on two uniformed National Guardsmen standing less than a mile from the White House. Witnesses described it as sudden, violent, and intentional. There was no warning. There was no confrontation. One moment they're standing post. The next, they're on the ground bleeding out on American soil. And then as news spread, fear rippled across the Capitol. Sirens, helicopters, emergency lockdowns, everything that you would expect when a national security threat detonates in the heart of the Republic. And almost instantly, nationwide outrage exploded. America's military, our sons, our daughters, ambushed in cold blood. And before the facts were even released, the media still found a way to blame everyone except the shooter. And then came the name, Rahmanullah Lakenwal, an Afghan national brought into the United States during the 2021 evacuation, one of the very people that Biden's administration insisted had been thoroughly screened, okay? But the details only grew darker from there. Early reporting revealed that Lakenwal wasn't just another evacuee. He had ties to CIA-backed units in Afghanistan, intelligence-linked, military-trained, and fast-tracked into the U.S. under Biden's rush job evacuation program. Now, here's the part that the media didn't want to touch. Officials hesitated to release his identity. They dragged their feet for hours, terrified of what it would confirm, that it wasn't a random act, but the direct result of a catastrophic immigration oversight. And so while the press scrambled for excuses, the truth became undeniable. The man who nearly killed two American guardsmen was delivered to our doorstep by Biden's broken vetting system. Now, before we go any further, let me just say something very important because moments like this really remind us how fast life can turn on you. The worst bills are the ones you never saw coming, and with the wrong Medicare plan, they hit hard. This is why I partner with Chapter. They show you exactly where your Medicare coverage is vulnerable before life exposes it for you. Now, one of our viewers said, if I hadn't called, that bill would have destroyed me. That's real, guys. That's what protection actually looks like. Now, most people aren't gambling anymore. Most people are choosing protection before the surprise comes. Most people are already dialing the phone number right there at the bottom of your screen, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron, or they're dialing the phone number at 909-563-8279 to get ahead of the danger instead of reacting to it afterward. And speaking of real people, Lee Berkland, he said, I called Chapter and will save $1,200 a year from my Medicare coverage. I told a friend's mother and gave her the phone number so that she can find out if she has the right plan or not. Stories like that hit different, guys. Not just because $1,200 a year is life-changing, but because one good decision didn't just stop with him. It spread. It helps someone that he cares about too. This is what community looks like, guys. That's the ripple effect that I love seeing in our audience. So Lee, really appreciate you sharing that with us. You never know who hears something something like that at the exact moment that they needed it. Now, to really understand how Ramanullah Lakenwal walked into America undetected, you really have to go all the way back to 2021 to Biden's catastrophic, chaotic, reckless evacuation known as Operation Allies Welcome. Nearly 90,000 Afghans were airlifted into the United States under a program that the White House bragged about as the most thorough vetting process in history. That was the shield. But behind closed doors, DHS officials admitted what they were refusing to say publicly. They couldn't confirm who was vetted before boarding the planes. Not how many, not when, not even if. Now, this program was the wide open doorway. In fact, it was the express lane, the conveyor belt that brought thousands of unvetted individuals directly into American neighborhoods. And now, one of those individuals, brought here under Biden's promise of safety, allegedly tried to execute 2 American soldiers on U.S. soil. Now, this wasn't an accident. This was a policy failure. And before investigators even identified the suspect, before doctors stabilized the guardsman, the legacy media machine snapped instantly into formation. MSNBC blamed the presence of uniforms in D.C. CNN floated vague theories about tension created by militarization. They weren't reacting. They were pre-spinning. They were pre-protecting Biden's narrative, terrified that this attack would lead straight back to his disastrous evacuation program. And they were right to be terrified, because the moment that the shooter's identity leaked, the entire media ecosystem went silent. No breaking banners, no bold chirons, no primetime outrage. Instead, they shifted into damage control, minimizing, downplaying, and when they couldn't avoid it, burying the CIA-linked connection deep into paragraph 9. Legacy media didn't want the truth. They wanted plausible deniability, and every second that they spent dodging reality made the public angrier, and the scandal even hotter. Now, if you think this vetting scandal started with this shooting, think again. The warning signs were already on record under oath in 2021. During Senate hearings, lawmakers asked Biden's Homeland Security Secretary the simplest question imaginable. How many evacuees were vetted before they got on the plane? And instead of giving a number, he gave a slogan. It's our policy to vet 100%. Policy, not results. Policy, not reality. Pressed again. So again, how many were vetted? Yes or no? The DHS chief finally admitted, I can't speak to that. Republicans later confirmed what the administration refused to say. In the rush to evacuate Kabul, they were simply loading planes to capacity. Think about that. No structured process, no background confirmation, no biometric clearing. And now, years later, the consequences of that evasion have materialized in the most brutal way possible on the streets of Washington, D.C. against our own National Guard. And as if failed vetting weren't horrifying enough, buried deep in the 2021 reports was another scandal that the media aggressively smothered. Several Afghan family units arriving with children brides, girls as young as early teens brought into the United States under the guise of family reunification. Now, when pressed on how the State Department handled this, officials didn't say, we arrested the men. They didn't say we protect the children. Instead, they say we make case-by-case recommendations, evaluating the length of the marriage and the cultural context. This wasn't a system. This was a moral collapse disguised as diplomacy. And the media, silent. Not one primetime feature, not one dedicated segment, not one investigative documentary, because admitting these stories existed would have destroyed the narrative that Operation Allies Welcome was humanitarian. It wasn't humanitarian. It was reckless intake at any cost, and America is still paying the cost today. Now, here's where the story turns from scandal to something far darker than that. Ramanullah Lakenwal wasn't just another evacuee lost in the scuffle. According to multiple sources, he actually had CIA-linked ties in Afghanistan, connected to U.S.-aligned paramilitary units during the war. Now, these are the types of individuals who historically undergo extra scrutiny, deeper background reviews, and long-term monitoring. But when Kabul collapsed under Biden's watch, that entire system evaporated overnight. Intelligence-linked personnel were rushed onto planes with almost zero documentation. Lists were incomplete. Files were missing. Identification checks were inconsistent at best. Then, once these individuals reached American soil, there was no structured follow-up. There's no assigned case officers. There was no integration assessment. They just simply disappeared into the population. So now the nation is forced to ask a very chilling question. How did someone connected to U.S. intelligence slip completely outside U.S. oversight? And how many more are out there, right? So while Biden's team dodged, deflected, and downplayed, President Donald J. Trump did the opposite. He walked straight up to the podium, looked the American people in the eye, and spoke with the clarity and force of a leader who understands the stakes. He called the attack exactly what it was, an act of terror, carried out by someone who never should have been in this country. And then he dropped the hammer. Effective immediately, Trump announced a full pause on migration from all third world countries until a brand new ironclad vetting system is completed. No loopholes, no ambiguous categories, no processing exemptions. His message was unmistakable. We will protect the American people first. And just like that, the entire tone of the national conversation shifted. Trump didn't just react. He reset the immigration debate overnight, leaving Democrats scrambling while millions of Americans breathed a sigh of relief. Now, the moment President Trump announced the migration freeze, the left absolutely imploded. Progressive commentators screeched that the order was racist, fascist, authoritarian. The same voices who spent years attacking the National Guard, smearing ICE, and accusing border agents of Nazism suddenly forgot that 2 American service members were shot in cold blood. Now, instead of acknowledging the obvious, Biden's vetting system collapsed. Democrats locked arms to defend the very program that enabled this attack. I mean, the same Operation Allies welcome that brought unvetted individuals, CIA-linked operatives, and even child brides into the U.S. is now being framed as some sacred humanitarian achievement. They don't want to talk about the failures. They don't want to confront the consequences. They want to protect Biden's legacy, even if it means ignoring a national security breach that nearly took 2 American soldiers' lives. The meltdown wasn't about policy. It was about political survival. And if you thought that the political class was bad, the online response made it 10 times worse. Within minutes of the suspect's identity hitting social media, extremist accounts on the far left began celebrating the attack. Celebrating, guys. Calling it a wake-up call, saying, shout out to the Patriot, joking that the guardsmen were KKED, right? Like a sick reference to the assassination of Charlie Kirk earlier this year. This wasn't fringe. These were verified accounts, influencers, activists, people who have spent years following the media's lead, calling conservatives Nazis, white supremacists, domestic terrorists. This is what happens when an entire political movement spends half a decade demonizing soldiers, police, and Trump supporters. Some unhinged person eventually decides that violence is justice. The left didn't create the shooter, but they created the environment where celebrating violence felt acceptable, and America saw that. Now, to really understand why the online left celebrates violence like this, you have to look at the narrative that they've been fed for years. Democrats and their media allies didn't just criticize Trump, they painted entire groups of Americans as Nazis. CNN guests warned about detention camps. MSNBC claimed Trump's DHS was kidnapping people into torture dungeons. They told viewers that conservatives, soldiers, police officers, and border agents were fascists targeting minorities. So what happens when you repeat this same message every day for 5 straight years? Someone eventually believes it. Someone eventually acts on it. So when this attack happened, many on the fringe left didn't see 2 guardsmen. They saw Nazis in uniform. That's the poison that they've been drinking from. And the predictable, catastrophic result is exactly what unfolded in Washington, D.C. Words matter, and their words have been lighting fuses. But something else happened after this attack, something that the media didn't expect. Millions of ordinary, moderate Democrats, people who vote blue by habit, not ideology, they saw the online celebration, the excuses, the media spin, and finally said, that's enough. They watched Biden's failure come home in the most brutal way possible. They watched Trump respond with strength while Democrats deflected. And for the first time, they confronted a truth that they've been trying to ignore. One side is trying to protect America, and the other side is trying to protect its narrative. Polling oversight showed a massive surge of support for Trump's migration freeze and a sharp rise in independent voters demanding stricter vetting. This attack crystallized everything wrong with Biden's 2021 evacuation and everything right about Trump's decisive leadership. This wasn't just violence. This was a political awakening, and it may reshape 2026 entirely.